topic is sustainability in the last mile. I'm speaking with Dan Nevin. He is general manager of Inmar Post-Purchase Solutions. Hi, Dan.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Thanks for being with me today. So
Thanks for
Dan,
having me.
as postal carriers, parcel carriers, and postal organizations invest millions in making the final mile more sustainable, how are they dealing with the impact of e-commerce on greenhouse gas emissions?
Yeah, so I think what we've seen globally and in the US is that there's a lot of progress being made, which is great. There's a lot of focus on reducing greenhouse gases and having a more positive impact on the environment as quite frankly, the volume in parcel fulfillment, not just e-commerce, continues to grow significantly. Based on a recent study that we saw from Pitney Bowes, that's forecasted to be something close to 300 billion parcels delivered by 2026
Wow.
annually.
Mhm.
So, uh, so I think there's a lot of awareness around that, and there's a lot of initiatives coming out of events. Recently, we've seen a lot of automation. There's still a lot of hype around things like drone deliveries and so on. But I think the focus is, when we look at kind of a 10-year horizon, is on the electric vehicles and automation
Mhm.
in that space, which will certainly go a long way to improve, I think, the impact that fulfillment is having on the environment today.
Yeah.
But I think the challenge is, though, is that it is a 10-year horizon. It's not a 6-month horizon. And I think that's where we need to be today, is start looking at initiatives that can have an immediate impact.
It seems like that technology you're talking about is ideal for these short hauls that would make up so much of last mile delivery. And I'd like to drill down a little bit more into some of those specific solutions that you just referenced. But how is it going in the US right now versus other countries in terms of current practices and plans for improving the situation?
Yeah, so I think arguably, and no disrespect to the US, other countries are further ahead, and a lot of that is led by population density and landscape and culture as well. So what we see in other markets right now is a huge adoption of pickup and drop off networks. You mentioned this, Bob, but the impact significantly is on the final mile, where there's a tremendous amount of miles put on the road to deliver parcels. And so what other countries are doing very well at right now, specifically the Nordics, Poland, and the UK, more and more each year, is introducing pickup and drop off networks as an alternative to home delivery.
Mhm.
And then importantly, driving customer awareness and adoption of those networks. So
Hmm.
I think that they're doing a good job there, and where we could be doing a better job in the US is not just in the networks themselves, but I give you an example that you have carrier-led networks in the US that create a customer conflict. An example might be that we've got one national carrier who's partnered with a large pharmacy chain, and another national carrier partnered with another pharmacy chain. Now, for a consumer, it's not convenient for me to visit both of those pharmacy businesses. So the intention was there, I think, for initially, but now we've created, a situation where we're not removing miles or reducing miles. We're arguably increasing the number of miles now it's
Yeah.
taking for customers to perform a job.
Mhm.
Um, and then we have these networks in the US, but a better job we could be doing there is awareness. So we see in other markets, Poland's a great example, where retailers are starting to promote alternatives to home delivery right at the checkout, as the primary delivery option, not the secondary or the third. And they're promoting it not as just the most convenient, but the most cost effective
Mhm.
and the greenest option, which again is when you can make that available to customers, they'll choose that option. But if we don't make that available to customers at the point where they make it, a transaction, then they're none the wiser, and they default to what they're used to, which is
Yeah,
very
well, you referenced one of those alternatives as being pick up and drop off, or so-called PUDO networks. Can you give us a sense of what that looks like? How does that work?
Absolutely. So Pluto Networks really is about creating convenience for customers where they can handle their parcels, whether that's a collection or a return, at a location ideally that they should be visiting already. So, we've researched this space a lot, and we know that grocery stores, for example, are great examples of that, because the penetration of e-commerce within grocery is very, very low, meaning that most customers are going to the grocery store to do their purchases, and they're doing that on a weekly basis. So we call that a consolidated trip if they can also handle a collection of an item or a return of an item. Whereas when we ask a customer to make a return at a post office, for example, or collect an item for a post office, there's no other reason for them to visit there. So we're not reducing the number of miles on the road. In fact, we're adding the number of miles because they have to now do a dedicated trip. So we've seen that the carbon emissions associated with e-commerce can be dramatically reduced by creating consolidated trips and leveraging PUDO technology to do that.
I see. You said it might be 10 years before we see real widespread electrification of these delivery fleets. That seems like a long time, especially given the short horizon that is being promised for electric passenger vehicles. I guess it's a different thing altogether. It's going to take a little bit longer on the commercial side?
Yeah, I think it might take a little bit longer. When I reference I think a 10-year horizon, I think that's where we see a fundamental shift. And we see a universal change from where we are right now to where we probably need to be. I think what I'm referencing is that as these carriers do make progress in that space, it won't be overnight. So there are strategies that can be adopted that are not about just improving emissions through technology or infrastructure, but is changing the emissions just by simply reducing the number of miles that it takes to deliver an item. Mm-hmm. And so there are two paths, and those paths can be ran simultaneously, and one of them can be achieved in a very short period of time whilst we make progress in the others.
Well, it's good to see that there is some progress being made. I imagine we would like it to be faster, but there are practicalities to be addressed, especially in the United States, as you say. Complexity of networks, redundancy of services by competing retailers. So, and yet it seems like there's some promise there. So Dan Nevin, thank you very much for talking to me about these topics, giving me a quick update on what's going on in that area. I do want to take a moment to ask you about Inmar itself, Inmar Post-Purchase Solutions. Tell me about the company. How are you formed, and what are you doing in the marketplace today?
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. So earlier this year, Doddle, which is actually an international provider of pickup and drop-off technology, and Inmar, one of the leading handlers of returns in the United States, we came together and formed a joint venture with a lot of what we just discussed in mind, which is about creating convenience for customers in e-commerce as that parcel volume increases and the problems within that are exasperated, and improving sustainability in that space as well, and pairing those two things together. So much of kind of what we're trying to do here is enable the consolidation of returns where we can, at locations that are convenient for customers, and where we can as well leverage existing transportation rails to receive those returns and handle them in the most sustainable way. So for example, something like 600 million returns a year come through our facilities at Inmar, of which we have a couple dozen facilities in the US. And of those 600 odd million returns, we'll keep 99% of that out of landfill. So we feel very strongly that if we can provide convenience to customers where they can make a package-free, label-free return at a consolidated trip location like grocery, that we can find transportation that already exists running back to one of our facilities so that we can process those returns in the most sustainable and cost-effective way. Yeah. And that the more we're able to do that, the more we'll be able to help e-commerce grow at the rate that it is today in a sustainable and economical way.
Great to hear. Dan Nevin of Inmar Post-Purchase Solutions, thanks again for giving us a snapshot of what's going on in the last mile in e-commerce and sustainability, as well as a little bit about Inmar Post-Purchase Solutions itself. Thank you very much for being with me today.
Thank you very much, Bob.